Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're taking a look at Exo's Aggro Forest deck. It piqued my interest after I first saw it. Of course, I will leave the article to this deck in the description below. Make sure to give it a read. It does have some matchup advice and just a few different little info blocks that really help out. Exo does an amazing job writing articles, and it's always interesting to see his decks, honestly. Aya does a great job as well. I just seem to be really partial to some of Exo's decks. Especially this one. This one really piqued my interest. You don't see much forest around now, and most of the ones you do, you're really only seeing stuff like B&B or neutral forest. You're not seeing any of the traditional aggressiveness that forest used to have, losing Roach. So it is good to see this deck. Of course, you are pretty unfavored against Burn Rune and Dragon, although I actually was doing pretty okay against Burn Rune myself. I don't know whether it's just the way I play or just a little bit of luck, but I did okay against them. You are pretty favoured against Portal just because you can out-aggro them really quickly, and of course Blood, but Blood has been pretty crapped on, so that's a little unfortunate. You go even against Haven. You can beat Shadow if you get a decent hand, of course. It's still a pretty even matchup as well, at least going by what was in that article that Exo had posted, so be sure to please do check that out. I think it's worth looking at that. Otherwise we'll get right into some games and check it out. So the first opponent we have here is Rune. Of course, like I said, unfavored against Burn Rune, but with a little bit of luck and a little bit of patience, it isn't impossible to win. Just because you aren't favored against something, it doesn't mean you cannot win with it. So that's why it's always worth giving it a shot. I always say, don't concede until you know you've lost. Because giving up and you know, thinking, oh, I've lost halfway into a game when you still got, 10 health and you're not dead on board next turn, it's such a waste. The potential that they could have nothing and the potential that you could draw something is always crazy good.
Will you be good to me?
Of course, there are going to be times you will get stomped on, which suck, but that's fine. So Furious Weed Elder Weedman combos really nicely with the Feta, the Gentle Bard, just because you can Gentle Elf I actually think it is. But either way, it is a really good card. Being able to get that extra draw power is something aggro always really wants. Being able to draw cards is very important. Even better is the fact that having two 1-drops that can go along with Elf Song, boosting again, you can actually be super aggressive compared to some of these other decks, especially Burn Rune. Burn Rune is usually a pretty aggressive class, but it doesn't take much for them to fall apart. If they don't quite get the burn or they're forced to trade with you, it can be really hard for them to recover. Especially now that we've drawn Fairy Driver, which will allow us to pretty much open up lethal paths with fairies, which Elf Song and Water Fairy are going to have a great job at stocking us up with at least 3 fairies for Driver turn 7. And we get 6 damage from Gentle Elf. I mean, that's always good. The Nature Tutors are a great card. I find using them just purely for both removal and getting that Ivy Spell Bomb can be the difference between having lethal damage and not having lethal damage with this deck quite often. I find it's normally hard to set up Fairy Driver lethals and normally use Fairy Driver just to pressure the opponent into a lethal into the next turn. Maybe going off Ivy Spell Bomb or off another card. So, of course, Water Fairy gets dropped, we get the Evolve again. I tend to be quite aggressive with the Evolves in this deck. I find that it's better just to get the damage where you can, boost your board before anything big drops, and really force your opponent to not be able to do anything. For example, even a Master Mage here is going to be difficult because they are going to have to evolve and trade, which means they are open to that Ivy Spell Bomb, while at the same time giving me more fairies to boost this Fairy Driver's damage. Like, I can't quite get lethal next turn because Fairy Driver, of course, isn't going to quite be able to do it. Or is it actually? No, Fairy Driver would have actually been enough. I obviously completely missed that lethal, thinking I needed to clear this Levi's, and if I hadn't made that mistake, I actually would have won, because Fairy Driver would have played the 2 fairies out with it. That would have been 4 damage, plus the Evolve would have been 6. So, don't miss stupid lethals. Of course, I am not perfect. Missing lethal is in human nature. Now that I look back on a lot of these games, you can see where your mistakes is, which is why I like using these replays over live footage. Live footage is a lot harder to commentate after the fact, so missing a lethal there is a lot harder to see and a lot harder to manage. Whereas doing them like this, I'm able to look at them objectively and go, okay, I really stuffed up there. Like in this case, I could have lethal a turn earlier. So between this video and my last one, the stupid ways you can miss lethal, I'm sure I could make a montage of just ways you miss lethal with these decks. But we had well and truly lethal that game, so at least, I mean, worst case, they watered me out. So just remember, guys, think about your lethals just a little bit more than I do sometimes, and you'll actually be able to pull off more wins than you think. So next up is Portal, using Nexus as the leader. I still think that was a great use of Nexus, making it the leader of Portal. So another pretty average hand. I'm not a huge fan of this one, just because you don't have anything super aggressive. Portal is, like I said, one of the few decks you are favoured against because you can be a lot more aggressive than Portal can be. Unless Portal has a really good hand. Plus, a lot of Portal players I have found to be quite bad. I personally would say I'm at least an average or above average Portal player. I'm definitely not the best, but I would put myself up there reasonably. And looking at some of these other Portal players, it really drags the win rate down. Plus, when there's only about a 10% usage rate on Portal at the moment, on average, it really makes Portal look like a bad class, when I think it's just not being utilized to its fullest at the moment. It definitely has its weaknesses, but I think most of those weaknesses can be countered just by people knowing how to play the deck and knowing you can win without things like deaths in your draw. It definitely isn't impossible. Airbound Barrage, pulling this fairy back into my hand, no reason not to. Getting rid of that 2-3, extremely important. There really wasn't much to this early game other than just throwing a few things to the board and just trading, just because there wasn't much I could do. I can set up pretty nicely going forward, especially turn 4, where I could actually use Gentle Elf and Elder Weedman together as a really good combo again. I love using that combo just to draw a card and at the same time buff my board slightly. I do want to trade with this 3-3 though, and the best way I could think of was Gentle Elf, because otherwise Portal is going to clear this reasonably quickly and reasonably easily. They don't have any concern for dealing with these cards. We do see Radiant Artifact getting dropped though. Forcing them to use that is pretty good. It means they didn't draw into anything better as a removal option. And we can actually go for the Ivy Spellbomb, which I love getting those for a 1 cost. They're literally a better version of Piercing Rune, I think. Just because the Ivy Spellbomb is a 1-drop, meaning that you can easily play a couple of other cards, or just play something like Tweedledee and play Ivy Spellbomb for 1. It is a 3 cost, but you are getting a body on board as well. So it's not that big a loss of both tempo and value in this case. And both Elf Songs are going to be super handy because Fairy Driver is going to actually get some decent value going forward. But they do go with some pretty crazy Acceleratiums. I really get annoyed sometimes when they absolutely just stack them on the board. I always think playing 2 isn't that good unless you are following up immediately with Deuce after. Like, Deuce is just so important to play. Machina, just crazy card when you actually get it to go off. If you don't have it, it definitely makes some of these matches, especially aggro or dragon matches, a lot harder. But not impossible to beat. So I feel a little bad for this Portal player here. And we get, of course, our Elf Song, boosting these 2 cards. I think that was better than boosting 1 card and like just playing that out. But at the same time, I could have actually played double Elf Song and had more fairies to work with instead. But I think this is fine, just because Fairy Driver plus double fairies and Ivy Spellbomb will be more than enough to deal some substantial damage to this Portalcraft player. Probably enough to actually threaten them into lethal as soon as possible. There just isn't much they can do to contend this. So Fairy Driver, 2 fairies, an Ivy Spellbomb. Gonna clear this 3-3 really easily. And then at least I can push 8 damage, maybe even 10 damage with that evolve there this turn. Putting them really close to lethal and forcing them to actually clear me with 3 cards total. 1 on board, 2 in hand, plus 1 off the draw. So 4 cards total to clear this entire board. They would need almost a perfect draw out of these to deal with this. And even if they do, I can quite easily Elf Song, Nature Torrent, set up a couple turns, get that damage in. Shouldn't be a problem at all. Mecha Wing Maiden. Looks like they're really favouring that ward, which really does screw up this forest deck, surprisingly. I definitely wouldn't have thought of actually using the ward in this way. And they get some alright cards. I'm a little impressed by how well they dealt with everything on my board here. Definitely not what I expected to see come out of this Portalcraft player right now. I know Portal does deal with boards really well, but to deal with everything with so little generation and still have a couple of cards in hand, I'm genuinely impressed by this player. But we are going to just be able to flood whatever we want onto the board here. We can set up that natural tutor as much as we want. Get that Ivy Spellbomb. Ivy Spellbomb's so important. That couple of damage means the difference between winning and losing most of the time. And they've now lost all of their other stuff, so they are forced to basically use either rush artifacts or use the 4/6 here, which they have. See you again next week. Which I don't mind too much, and Brambles makes these trades really bad. Meaning they're more than enough in range of this Ivy Spellbomb to push my lethal if I draw into the right cards. So, Gentle Elf, really good. Probably should have went with the Fairy first, because the Fairy, then Ivy Spellbomb would have got the extra 2 damage, and I would have been able to boost both of these on board. I really don't know why I actually played the Ivy Spellbomb first. I think it might have actually been a misplay, like just generally clicking the wrong thing too fast. And that even happens on a pro level, so of course it's bound to happen to us normal players, eh? Okay, Biofabrication, not too much of a threat. They've literally got 1 card in hand. They've got 1 on board that's removal and gonna die to Brambles. Brambles literally locks down Portal, so I always love using that one. And we now have Emperor, so 1 damage to face plus Emperor is lethal unless they can draw into a ward or into anything majorly big. I don't see them actually blocking me out. So I set up a perfect lethal, flood the board, don't have a reason not to. Keep generating fairies in case I do get Fairy Driver. And their draw obviously not being enough to deal with this. Okay, last but not least, I want to show you guys the other rune match that I got to play. This one was a much more pure burn rune compared to the first rune we faced. That other rune was just a little awkward. This hand, pretty garbage, all 4 drops, really nothing early, nothing too useful to me. This hand though, much better. Gentle Elf, Goblin, Water Fairy, perfect way to curve out. All I'd need would be a Weedman and I'd be set. If not, there are plenty of other cards that can go nicely with this deck. Airbound Barrage is pretty solid as well. So we see the Goblins, impressive I guess. We've also got the Water Fairy, which is going to be a good play, and we can just use Airbound to bounce the Goblin back and get rid of their own Goblin, since we already got the ping off it. Plus it forces them to trade into this Water Fairy if they want to do anything at all in this next turn. And of course, Wood of Brambles. Perfect. Perfect thing to draw here. Really going to make it hard for them to do anything, just because these 1-drops are now actually able to deal with most 2-drops and even some 3-drops. Really impressive. Illusionist, no big problem. Even with 1 Earth Essence, I should be able to deal with that, although I do need to deal with this Dwarven Alchemist as well. So that's kind of a pain. I can't really afford to just go face now. I need to deal with both of these. Remove the Earth Sigil, remove the Dwarven Alchemist. At least I will have this 3/3 here maybe. Actually, just removing the Magic Illusionist. I guess that was the better play. Debating on whether to remove one or the other was something I did a little bit during this match, just because trying to remove the Dwarven Alchemist or the Mage both have really good value. I think the Mage is more value in the long run against Fairies, just because it is a 2/2. So Dwarven Alchemist probably not quite as good. Well, definitely not quite as good, but definitely not the worst cut either. And now that we are kind of going into the mid-game-ish, we do need to start dropping some of these elves and just start trading with some stuff. Plus this Gentle Elf. Gentle Elf I found to be a really amazing card in this deck. I'm actually surprised how much I like playing it. I would actually almost consider running some other kind of buff, just so I can take advantage of Gentle Elf more often. So we see the Illusionist, Mage of Nightfall, but no Sigil, which means using this Illusionist to trade would feel so bad. That's gotta feel horrible. And we still got another Gentle Elf and at least a couple of fairies we can drop here, or we can just drop the Weedman and Elf Song for a nice little buff. So Elf Song gives us the buff we want, plus another draw. Looking for really anything that I can take advantage of here. Fairy Driver would probably be ideal just because we have so many fairies, and turn 7 it's at least a minimum of 6 damage. We've actually got 9 on board now, and they really haven't got anything left. I mean, even with a clear here, it would be hard, and they can't get a clear on turn 6 without Nurse Sigil on board beforehand, so they just don't have any way to actually deal with my full board effectively. This Golem, not using it for burn and having to trade, I just start to feel for this Rune player, man. Like, what are they doing to us? This Rune player here. Especially now that I'm using Fairy Driver, I just use it to trade. Because, you know, 6/6 is much more threatening than anything else they could do. And even if they do board clear, you know, I've got fairies, elf songs, nature. We're going to be able to deal with things pretty reasonably, I think. So even with a full board clear, I am really not concerned. Wizard of Oz, a little bit of a pain. Dealing with Oz is always a difficult thing to do, especially when they get 1-drop mutagenic bolt. And piercing rune, that's always great to see. Alright, so they get 10 health. And we draw absolutely perfectly. Fairy Driver, double elf song. We don't even need the double elf song. The Fairy Driver plus the fairies, 1 elf song, boosting my board completely. That's going to be exactly 10 damage, which is amazing. Even if it wasn't, I think those rats would have made it difficult on them. But absolutely astounding draw. That Fairy Driver just giving us perfect lethal here was absolutely awesome. So hope you guys enjoyed Exo's Aggro Forest deck. Again, I recommend you check out his article in the description below. It is great. If you want to check out the Shadowverse's YouTube channel, please do that. I've been doing the best of series for that channel along with their thumbnails and descriptions and other things like that for a fair little while now. And I'm hoping you guys are enjoying that content there too. So please go to the Shadowverse YouTube channel. I will probably make it the 2nd or 3rd link in the description below. It's definitely worth checking out. Also, make sure to hit up the Discord, which I have been linking at the top of every description so far, so more of you can join. We're really promoting that, pushing it, trying to make it as big as we can, the Shadowverse scene. I really want to see more of you guys there, so please check it out. As always, deck list in the description below. Hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.